Hey everybody, welcome to the channel. My name is Eric, and in today's episode, we get to demystify one of my all-time favorite cheeses, Greek Feta. Greek Feta is not very complicated to make if you follow certain steps. And so what you'll see in the next 15 or so minutes is my obsessive-compulsive approach to cheese making. And if you follow those steps the way that I've outlined them, you're going to get the exact same results. A feta cheese that's perfectly salty, crumbly when you break it apart, creamy when you bite it, with robust flavor. So we're going to be using goat milk for this feta cheese. If you can't get goat milk, you can always use cow's milk. And if you want to synthesize those earthy, musky, sort of funky flavors that come from using goat milk in cheese, you can always add a little bit of lipase. Just remember that a little bit goes a long way, and it's super easy to over-funk your cheese with lipase. So with that being said, let's jump into the process on how to make Greek Feta.
All right, to get started, we're going to set up an immersion circulator at 93, 94 degrees Fahrenheit. And if you want to hear my thoughts on using sous vide in cheese making, let me know in the comment section below. It may not be all it's cracked up to be. All right, so we're also going to put in a temperature controller. That's just to make sure that everything is reading true. And then I've got my timer, and there's my dot from ThermoWorks. So these two are going to be used throughout the entire process. I do want to take the starting pH of our goat's milk, and you could use sheep or cow's milk to make feta cheese. Starting pH is 6.55, and I'm showing you that because I want you to see what happens to the pH through the process of making this particular cheese. As far as starter cultures go, we're going to be using a mesophilic thermophilic blend from New England Cheesemaking Supply Company called MT1. This is a specific feta culture. It produces a really nice, robust flavor, and we're just going to sprinkle a little bit on top of our milk. Once we sprinkle our starter culture on top of the milk, we want it to rehydrate. And so we're going to let it sit there for about 5 minutes. After 5 minutes, we're going to mix it with an up and down motion, making sure that we incorporate it well. And you're going to mix it for 5 minutes. I'm making 2 3-gallon batches here. In the description box below, you're going to find a printable recipe with adjustable quantities and a full description of what we're talking about here. So after we've mixed it, I'm just going to go ahead and put a lid on it. We're going to now ripen our milk, allow that culture to work for 1 hour. So set a 60-minute timer and let it do its thing. Now, once that 60 minutes is over, our culture has now had a chance to wake up and do its thing. Let me go ahead and show you the pH of the milk 1 hour later. Now remember, we were at 6.55. We're now at 6.47. So starter culture is waking up. It's starting to produce lactic acid. And now we're going to add our calcium chloride. Now, calcium chloride is not a necessary ingredient if you're using raw milk. Goat, sheep, cow, it doesn't matter. If you're using pasteurized milk, you want to use calcium chloride. And all you do is mix diluted calcium chloride into your milk, give it a nice stir. What this does is it restores the balance of calcium, giving you a nice firm curd and a slightly larger yield. So once you add your calcium chloride, give it 5 minutes before you add your rennet. Notice my milk is at temperature at this point. I'm at 93 degrees Fahrenheit. So 5 minutes have passed, and now we're going to add our rennet. The rennet's been diluted in some distilled water, and we're just going to stir that for 60 seconds with an up and down motion, and that's it. After 60 seconds, stop stirring and then let the milk begin to coagulate. Feta is a great cheese to make because it's relatively forgiving when it comes to setting the curd. I'm going to set a 60-minute timer, but realistically, you could do 90 minutes. We're just locking in the moisture inside those curds. If you're just getting started into cheese making, use the timer method. It's a whole lot easier. But if you've been making cheese for a little while, you might want to consider the flocculation method. That's what this method is right here. And this method utilizes the time that it takes your milk to coagulate, which is what that looks like. See how it's no longer moving on the milk? Anyway, that's a subject for an entirely different video. And if you'd like to see that video, leave me a comment in the comment section below. So your rennet's been added. You're going to put your top on the milk and let it coagulate for at least 60 minutes. Notice how there's whey on top of our milk. If I press on it with my hands, and you really want to get into it when you're making cheese, like get the feel of it. It should feel like a firm yogurt at this point. You'll get a clean break when you put your finger in it or if you cut it with a knife. And now it's time to cut our curds. So it is important to know that curd size matters. The bigger the curd, the more moisture your cheese is going to retain. Think camembert versus parmesan. I'm going to be using a cheese harp that I had made like specifically for these bins, and they're going to give me 1 inch horizontal cuts. That's just going to make the curds a little more even when I'm finished. But if you don't have a cheese harp, that's okay. Just use a knife and do the best that you can. So I do want to add that when cutting the curds, especially if you're using a cheese harp, you want to take your time. You want the entire time that it takes to cut your curds to be about 10 minutes. So in my case, after I did the harp cut, I waited about 5 minutes, and then I began to do the horizontal cuts at the top, waited a few more minutes, and then I did my vertical cuts. And that's going to keep the structure of the curd intact. It's going to keep you from losing too much whey too quickly, and it's just going to produce an overall better cheese. So let's go ahead and finish cutting the curds. And as soon as I'm done, I want those curds to heal. So we're going to set a 5-minute timer and just leave them undisturbed. They're going to slightly sink down a little bit. Our cuts are going to begin to heal. And now we get to stir. And this is where everything that you've done so far can be ruined if you're not careful. You want to be super gentle because those curds are very, very delicate. So we're going to very gently move those curds around. And I'm going to start with the top half of those curds. I'm not really trying to dig in too deep, and I'm just bringing them up, kind of aerating them. That's going to help them dry out a little bit. And over the next 20 minutes, we're going to stir 2 or 3 times every 5 minutes. And you're going to notice that those curds are going to begin to firm up. So remember, as you stir and those curds are sort of bouncing into each other, whey is being released. So if you want a creamier feta, you're going to stir like I'm doing here, sporadically every 5 minutes for 20 minutes. If you want a drier feta, you're going to stir a little bit more often. But however you end up doing it, you just want to be super gentle because you do want those curds mainly intact. So we're just going to keep stirring sporadically over 20 minutes, bringing those curds to the surface. And if I happen to notice any one particular curd bigger than another one, I'll just use my spoon to cut it in half. No big deal. Okay, let me show you what to look for when your curds are ready to be put in molds. Remember when we cut our curds, they had very square edges? Well, when you've stirred for 20 minutes sporadically, your curds are going to hold their structure. They would have firmed up a bit, and the edges are going to be rounded. See that? They're all rounded edges. That's what I'm looking for with feta cheese. Now, every cheese is different, but once I have those rounded edges, I'm going to go ahead and pull some whey down to the level of the curds, set that to the side, and then I'm going to begin putting my curds into their molds. And we're using 1-pound molds from the New England Cheesemaking Supply Company, and I should be able to get all those curds into those molds, but I've got a couple smaller molds just in case. Our curds have been put into their molds. We're not going to apply any weight. We're just going to let the natural weight of the curds press those down. We're going to cover it with some cling film. That's going to keep the humidity high, and we're going to let it drain overnight. For the first 4 hours, we're going to remold and flip every hour. And I'm going to let these drain in an area where the temperature is between 68 to 77 Fahrenheit or 20 to 25 Celsius. And I want high humidity, 85 plus, but that's naturally going to be achieved because our curds are covered. So while that's going down, I'm going to take the whey that we pulled from this process and make our brine. Feta is a brined cheese. And this isn't necessary, as you can make a brine with regular water, but I like using the whey because the calcium levels are right, the pH is generally already there, and so you don't have to do a whole lot other than add salt. But if you are going to make a brine with just regular water, you want to make sure that you add calcium chloride and vinegar in addition to salt to your brine, and that's going to keep calcium from being leached out of your cheese, and it's going to keep your cheese from getting slimy. So if you want to see a video on how we prepare brine, no matter the percentage, a very easy way to do it, just leave me a comment in the comment section below. We'll make a dedicated video about that. Now, we're using a brine bucket because it has this particular top, which will keep everything submerged. And this small brine bucket, it's the Brine Bucket Junior, can hold about 6 pounds of cheese. All right, so we're going to take that prepared brine and store that in our cheese cave. It's 55 degrees Fahrenheit or 13 degrees Celsius. So I want to make sure that my brine is already cooled by the time we brine our cheese. All right, so it's been 1 hour and it's time to flip our cheese for the first time. This process is pretty straightforward. The curds have had a chance to settle a little bit under their own weight. There's enough structural integrity in your cheese at this point where you don't have to be too delicate. And if you press on it, you're going to notice that it's coming together nicely. It's starting to firm up quite well. And so we're just going to pop those out of the mold and just flip them over and put them right back in the same mold. Once we're done, we're going to cover that, and then we're going to repeat this exact same process 3 more times. So once an hour for the first 4 hours. So once you're done flipping, you're going to cover it back up, leave it on the counter overnight, and the next day we're going to begin the salting and aging process. Now there's 2 ways to initially salt your feta. You could either brine it or you can dry salt it. Now the method I'm going to show you here is dry salting. I've had much better success initially dry salting my cheese, so that's what we're going to do. And all we're going to do is unmold our cheese. So one question we do get a lot when it comes to cheese making is, how do we know when it's time to move on to the next step? In this case, salting and aging. And you could guess, wait 12 hours and hope that enough lactic acid has been produced, or you can actually test the pH, and that's what we're going to do. So for feta, I like to target a 4.6 to 4.7 pH in my cheese. If I'm not there yet, I'm going to let it continue to ripen until I get there. But as you can see, 4.66, I'm kind of right in the middle. Absolutely perfect. It's now time to begin the salting process and the aging process. So when you're dry salting, you have to be careful not to add too much salt at one time. If you add too much salt at one time, you can actually create something called case hardening for your cheese, where the salt draws out too much moisture. It's going to give you a really tough outer shell on your cheese, which will affect the way that the cheese turns out in the end. So we're just going to sprinkle a 1/4 teaspoon on the top surface of each one of our cheeses, and then we're going to wait 12 hours. So 12 hours later, we're going to sprinkle another 1/4 teaspoon on the other side of the cheese. Waiting 12 hours allows that first application to soak in, draw out some of the moisture very gently, and then when you turn it over, you don't lose any of the salt that you added. So as we flip each one of our cheeses over, we're going to add another 1/4 teaspoon over the surface of each one of our cheeses. And this is doing a lot of things right now. Number one, it's drawing moisture out, no question about it. But adding salt also slows down lactic acid production, which is going to keep our cheese from over acidifying. So once you're done salting, this is now the second time we've done it, we're going to cover that and let it hang out for 12 more hours. Okay, so let's recap. After unmolding the cheese and the pH was right, we're going to dry salt each block of feta with 1/4 to 1/2 teaspoon of coarse salt for 2 days. And every 12 hours, we're going to flip that. So we're just going to apply salt to one side every 12 hours for 2 days. We're going to keep this at 68 to 77 Fahrenheit or 20 to 25 Celsius with a high humidity, which is why we keep it covered. 2 days have passed, our cheese is salted, and if you press on it, it should feel firm but have some give. And the final pH of this cheese before we put it into our storage brine should be between 4.5 and 4.6. And when we test with our Apera pH meter, very easy pH meter to use in cheese making, we got a 4.50. So absolutely super perfect. I couldn't be more pleased with the results at this stage. It's now time to brine it. Now remember, our brine has been in 55 Fahrenheit for the better part of 2 days. And I want my cheese to be the same temperature as my brine. So I actually placed the cheese in the cheese cave for about 5 or 6 hours so that the temperature of my cheese can drop. And now they're the same temperature. If you place warm cheese in a cold brine, it could shock it. And I don't want to do that. So we're just going to go ahead and place our cheese blocks into that 8% brine solution. And I'm using the Briner Junior, which is absolutely brilliant for cheese making, especially if you're not making, over 6 or 7 pounds, because it has this great little lid. You can lock it into place. It keeps everything submerged. And we're just going to cover that and place that into our cheese cave so that it can continue to age. Our cheese cave is at 55 degrees Fahrenheit or 13 Celsius with an 85% humidity, but the humidity is irrelevant for this cheese because it's in a brine. So we're just going to let it hang out there for at least 2 months. The longer you let it age, the more developed the flavor is going to be. And like I said earlier, 55 degrees Fahrenheit, 13 degrees Celsius. And I let mine age for about 4 months. So let's go ahead and pull it out of the chamber and give it the good old-fashioned taste test. This cheese feels great out of the brine. It's firm, but has some give to it. If it were to have case hardening, it would feel like a hard shell surrounded the whole cheese. When I pull it apart, it crumbles beautifully, which is one of the characteristic signs of a well-made feta cheese. Now, it holds together, don't get me wrong, but with a little bit of pressure on my fingers, you could see how well that crumbles. Absolutely beautiful, and it has a wonderful smell. It has that fermented, tangy smell, which I'm sure is going to carry over in the flavor. So let me take this little piece and see what happens.
Okay, feta cheese. I love this cheese. And now it's time for the moment of truth. What does it taste like? So let's give it a smell. It smells wonderful. It smells like classic feta. No off smells whatsoever. Down the hatch. That's lovely. Crumbly when you break it apart with your fingers, but super moist, super creamy when you eat it. It's perfectly salted. I don't find this to be too salty. If you make feta at home and you find it to be too salty, soak it in some cool water for like an hour. It'll help draw some of that salt out. Let's take another bite. That's incredible. A little watermelon, a little lime, a little mint. I can eat this all day long. The flavors are certainly more developed than when we first made it. 4 months I've allowed this cheese to mature. It's earthy, a little nutty. It's got that piquant kind of flavor to it, especially because we use goat milk. If you use cow's milk and you don't add lipase, then it's going to be a little more mild. And that's okay too. It's still going to be amazing. And I hope that you get a chance to try this Greek feta recipe. If you're new to cheese making, I want to encourage you to push past the failures. You're going to have a lot of failed cheeses, and that's okay. That's part of the beauty of this particular craft. And hopefully, through this OCD version of how to make Greek feta, you can nail it on your first time. If you found this video helpful or entertaining in any way, please give it a thumbs up. If you have any questions, in the comment section below. And if you're new, we'd like to say welcome. Don't forget to hit that notification bell. We post new videos each week. We'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.